by the daffodils in the houses near me, how early they come up, or the crocuses. And we also see melting glaciers for Glacier National Park. Our sea level is rising, which we'll talk about practically how we see that here in Maryland. You can change slide. So it's shifting our climate overall. And many things drive that. The climate does naturally shift over time, but science has shown us that we as humans have really accelerated that shift from the cars we drive, from those coal plants or natural gas plants that we see driving up climate emissions. In addition to that, but we have this circuit. And I really like this graph because it shows the connection between climate change and people and nature. A lot of times people think of conservation or climate change or nature as like separate things. And we definitely think of people as separate things. But we're all in this together because people were formed from the dust of the ground. And while we're driving climate change, we're also being affected by climate change. And if I have any traditional environmentalists who are like me, who think that the best church is found on the river and the trees, and we want to do as much as possible to protect it, nature is also impacted by climate change, not just as we cut down trees, but also if we're breathing polluted air, the fish are breathing, or the birds are breathing polluted air. If rain becomes more acidic from pollution, that's going into our watersheds, that's going into our rivers, our streams. So we're all connected with climate change. But we also all can work to improve it by planting trees. St. John's did a stormwater garden very recently, a long quest to get it completed, but that cleans our air, that reduces our emissions into the air as well, that worsens climate change. So all of these things are connected. Next slide, please. All right. And so how do we see that play out for us? Because, you know, I find that we are all a mix. Some of us really love getting lost in nature and would do anything to preserve it. And some of us are like, I gotta take my kids to school, I gotta get where I need to go, I'm working for what is no longer 8 hours, it seems like. You know, we're busy people, and yeah, I care about climate, but, oh, please go back. But I have a life too. So I think it's really important to talk about the human impacts of climate change that we see. We see rising temperatures, and that affects our health. This area is a very urbanized area. There's not tons of green space or parks or trees or forests. So it tends to be hotter. There's a lot of pavement. There's a lot of sidewalks. That makes the heat rise because there aren't any plants to absorb that heat. When we deal with heat effects, that can increase our blood pressure. If we have any type of respiratory illness, that can exacerbate it. So if your child has asthma, or if you as an adult have asthma, or maybe you have COPD, the heat exacerbates all of that. We have flooding. Flooding can cause damage to our house, to our church. And when you don't have a lot of plants to absorb that rainwater, it goes somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. And so when you have more of that, that creates flooding. And that also can cause more water main breaks. If anyone's read all the many articles when DC has a water main break again, and they have to boil their water, that is exacerbated by flooding. And then we also have the air quality. We talked about, coal plants, natural gas plants, incinerators, all those things create emissions. That makes our air quality worse. Was anyone around here in 2024? June? Yeah? What happened in June of 2024? Yes, there were wildfires in Canada. And we felt that here. I was sitting in an office and I could hardly, my eyes were burning. We canceled. I usually went and saw my grandmother on Saturday, and we canceled because she was 93 at the time and I didn't want to take her outside. We saw that here. It affects our breathing. And then we also have vector-borne diseases. And that's because we have more precipitation. It's warmer longer, so there's no winter to kill off the bugs. We deal with mosquitoes. Does anyone remember viruses, vector-borne viruses, maybe Zika? Or we had changes in vector-borne viruses. There was this really big one. It was started in 2019, 2020. Something like COVID? So those things all are exacerbated from climate change, and we've already been seeing those effects, and they affect us personally and our children and our loved ones. So now we can move on. All right, this is my friend Charles Dickens, who wrote A Tale of Two Cities. We're going to talk about two cities that are right here near us, and we're going to see how climate affects them. And we're going to talk about something called climate vulnerability. Next slide. So what is climate vulnerability? Well, we have here climate events, such as the temperature that we just talked about, rain, extreme weather events, maybe like hurricanes that hit our way here. And then we have the ability to rebound. So I'm going to give you an example. Back when I was 20, I was homeless. So I was living out of my car. It was very cold because it was wintertime, but I'm very thankful looking back that it wasn't like the summer of 2024 or 2023. But if I had been hit by a climate disaster, maybe it flooded really badly and my car was destroyed and I couldn't use it to get to school or work or whatever, my socioeconomic attributes, such as being homeless, would have made me more vulnerable to the heat. I would have had enhanced environmental exposure because I was essentially living outside, but this can also apply to outdoor workers. And my ability to respond to if I dealt with that event. Do you think I had a good savings account at that time? Probably not. I didn't. So I was at that time very vulnerable. Now, I am no longer homeless, do not worry. I own my house. I have a savings account. I work in beautiful Woodend in an air-conditioned office. My vulnerability, even though I live in the same area, which is the DC metro region, I have less vulnerability. I'm able to respond. If my house is flooded, I can go, it would affect me. It would be a huge bummer, but I have the resources to be able to recover. So that's climate vulnerability. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to get into GIS stuff. I really enjoyed researching this for your talk. Hopefully, as much as you will enjoy hearing about it. This is a community equity index. Everyone has access to this. This is part of Montgomery County's community equity index. They measure things like housing, poverty levels, wealth, access to transportation. All these different things go into assessing whether you are The yellow, whitish yellow is, neither advantaged or disadvantaged. The blue, light blue, there's a slight advantage or a big advantage if you're dark blue. And then the orange to red to anywhere in between there's a disadvantage. So we are here. This is where St. John's is located. You are in a neither advantage or disadvantage community, but what are some things you notice about the areas around where we are? Surrounded by very advantaged. And what do you think are some of what would make something advantage when it comes to climate vulnerability? Think of the story, my life. Trees, yeah. Well, yeah, resources to deal with it. That's exactly right. And then we have this kind of section up the county where we see some really disadvantaged areas. Some are even red. What do you think would make someone disadvantaged? Poverty, yep, excellent. What else?
It's like right on the 270 corridor, so if you have more noise or whatnot.
Very good. Okay. What about one of the factors is whether language access. If you're able to speak English, or English is your second language, or maybe you don't speak English well. Maybe you don't have access to transportation. So you are waiting for a bus to get you to the metro. Maybe you have the misfortune of having to live near that Purple Line construction, which will be wonderful when it starts, but we all, yes, I see the smiles. So thank you. Let's do the next one. All right, then they have climate vulnerability, okay? Now they're showing on this map, which can be distracting with the dots, but I couldn't remove them. And I think they're actually important. Here you see this map where you have the equity index, like social advantage or disadvantage. And then you have down here that purple to very light pink is how vulnerable you are to climate events. What are some things we notice about this map? If you can figure out the pink behind the blue dots. Yeah, waterways, yep. What about who's vulnerable? Can we tell? Yeah, yeah, so this area looks pretty vulnerable, yes. We also see a lot of vulnerability. Some of the darkest purple is also right up the center. And these blurbs are helpful because they remind us who's advantaged or disadvantaged as well. So the dark blue blurbs show advantaged to disadvantaged for red, orange, etc. So let's dive in further. Let's look at a different place. Can you click? What are some of the things that we deal with here in Chevy Chase when it comes to climate impact? This is where Montgomery County got its sources. So we see flooding, all right? Now, to be really confusing, right here where you see 91st, that's what our risk is in the national compared to nationwide. So we're in the 91st percentile, which means we have a really high risk for flooding. And then that 255th ranks our vulnerability compared to the rest of Maryland. And there are 1,400 different things that they're comparing it to, which means we're kind of up there compared to the rest of Maryland when it comes to flooding and climate events. Storms, we're seeing storms drop more rainfall at once, yes. And then we go really long periods without rain. Last fall, we had snow over the winter, but we're going long periods without rain, and then we're being dumped on. And that creates a lot of flooding because the ground is very dry and is not able to absorb water, and all the water has to go somewhere. yes? And it ends up going, if we're in a community with lots of road and sidewalk, it goes into storm drains, but it can also overwhelm those storm drains. So what are some of the drivers of our vulnerability? And I think this is really important because overall vulnerability, it shows we can be high up there with flooding and storms. But in our area, we're actually low when it comes to air pollution deaths. Yay. That's a good thing. But we show right here, this is kind of white. Yes, this is where we are. It's kind of white, which means we're very low on the climate vulnerability index. Why do we think that is? Even though we have high risk of flooding, bad storms, why do you think we're so low on the climate vulnerability index?
Resource.
Hey, all right. And we are high on air pollutants, and we'll talk about what some of those air pollutants are. But we're very good access to transportation. I think there's one more click we can do. We're not a food desert here. And governance apparently is our strength here. Go figure. We also have really good access to healthcare and housing. Those things are instrumental in protecting us from these climate risks. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to go a little bit over. We're just going a few census tracts over to Montgomery Knolls in Silver Spring, not very far away. Yet, they're kind of in here when it comes to climate vulnerability. So let's see why. So they're similar in that they also are high risk for storms, but actually not as high as we are. They also are very high issues of precipitation, rain, etc. Very high risk for air pollution deaths, even though they're just like Silver Springs, very close, yes? Let's click further. See why. All right, so their environment, they deal with a lot more pollutants than we do in that area. But, oh my goodness, look at this. Housing type and transportation, they're the 99th percentile in the nation for risk. So that is not a good thing. It's not like a 99% A+ on a test. That's like a 1% F failure. And they're third highest risk in Maryland. They're also very high. If you remember, there are just over 1,400 tracts that are being compared in housing composition and disability, socioeconomic stressors, and I believe there's one more click. Access to finance and health. Look how high they are, 179 in most vulnerable and 1,400 in Maryland, to chronic disease prevention. So things like healthcare, housing, access to transportation, finances can be the difference between being in this like very light section for climate vulnerability compared to a darker, and this is not even the darkest. We have some darker sections up here, but they're very close to us, and yet there's such a difference. Apparently, it's also the difference in air pollution related deaths. All right, next slide, please. So what are some of the extreme events that we all see? We're back to our area now, but you can see some of these areas, it's all similar coloring. So these areas all experience extreme events that we see from climate here in Maryland. Can you click, please? Oh, I think you lost the slides. Up here? Yes. So we have very high vulnerability from climate events. We talked about flooding. So compared to the rest of the nation, you're pretty up there, the 91st percentile, which means you're really, really high risk for flooding in this area. Storms, 76th percentile. And And you're in the top third in Maryland for both flooding and drought. And the reason that is, as I said, is they all work together. When you go really long periods without rain and the ground dries up, it becomes fallow, which means things kind of tend to run off of it. Instead of soil absorbing the water, that's why stormwater gardens are so special, because the plants loosen up the soil. It has a chance to sit and absorb instead of running off into the highway, into your basement. So these are some of the top things we see in terms of climate events. Our storms are getting worse, more severe, and it's not just happening in Asheville with the latest hurricane. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, you also, if you remember, we also deal with pollution sources. Things like metal recyclers, we're still in the same area, and you can see it's all similar pink color for vulnerability. Hazardous waste management facilities. Facilities that participate in air markets basically means any polluting entity that sets up shop in this area, but they say, oh, we're not polluting because we buy energy credits. So we buy credits so that we can go, plant trees somewhere that may not be here, And I think that's really important, because when we have energy credit programs, as wonderful as that is for bringing in income for climate issues, that doesn't protect the community where those places are set up. You still have to deal with pollution from that entity. Next slide, please. All right, so we're gonna get down to the nitty gritty. Pollution knows no borders. It goes anywhere. It doesn't recognize county lines. We're right next to DC, so any polluting entities in DC, even though they're not showing up here, we still deal with the impacts of them. And this map on the right, you will see, let's see, Binning Road, Buzzard Point, these are all power plants, natural gas power plants. These triangles, which is Gude, landfill, there's an old power plant there. Landfills create methane gas that have to be managed. Those are also polluting entities. So all through here, you have polluting entities, and that doesn't document what comes on the other side of the border in Maryland or in DC. It also does not document, we have this special excitement of, has anyone heard of Data Center Alley in Virginia? Oh, yes, you all are in the know. Thank God that's not here, yes? Well, guess what? Those diesel backup generators that they have to do maintenance. So this is Dr. Shiley Wren. He did research on how those impact our health. And Montgomery County bears the greatest brunt of the health impacts from the data centers in Virginia, because we have the pleasure of being like downwind a little ways, and we're a very dense community. So that's air pollution that we experience from over the river. There's no wall barrier that protects us. Next. Okay, and greenhouse gas emissions anywhere still impact us here. And we see that last year broke records for, again, being the hottest of the year, or of year ever. Beat 2023, which was the previous hottest year ever. And then we also see flooding. This is a picture of flooding, and there have been more than 2,500 flood-related incidents. This was a study done through 2020, from 2006 to 2020. All right, next slide. All right, anyone remember this chart? Health impacts. So even if you think we're not experiencing climate change impacts, which we are, but they impact our health. All right, next slide. What can I do to make a change? My goodness, Lydia, you just saddled me with this depressing information. What do you expect me to do with it? Deep breath, anxious for nothing. When I think about doing things, I think about the parable of the sheep and the goats, and I have 5 minutes, so I can't have you guys do call and response with that. But I think about how Jesus said he was a stranger. He didn't know what the stranger's beliefs were, came with no background information, didn't know who they voted for, but you invited me in. I was sick and you visited me, I was in prison, etc. And I think this is really important to I tell you the truth, when you do it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do it unto me. And I think that applies for us as humans and for the earth. Next slide. So what can you do? I went and did a visit to Still Meadow Community Fellowship Church in Baltimore, and they became a climate resilience hub. You can see they have, can't see it well here, but they have solar on top of their roof for backup generation. They have battery storage. This is a rain cistern. They have a community garden. They created a park in their church, but it wasn't just typical green things. Through that park, which is important for our mental health, they found, man, we need to be in the community more. And you guys have great volunteer groups. I was reading them as I was on my way back from the bathroom. They did food drives. They did a green job development for people who are in re-entry, which you guys have a prison re-entry group that I saw as a volunteer group back there. They really looked at disaster preparedness. You know, if we were to have flood or a hurricane and people needed a place to come to know what to do, we can be a church where people know and we can accommodate them. Let's get trained up to see how we do that. So that is one option. Next slide. All right, my favorite. This is what I do. Advocate on local and state climate goals. So what are some of the things we see happening in Maryland? You could click again. You can click again. All right. So some of the things. This was a bill from the 2024 General Assembly that was pushed by Governor Moore to remove exemptions for data centers on diesel generators. So in Frederick, we have a big data center campus in Frederick, Maryland. And in order to build it, he made exceptions for our very high climate standards in Maryland so that data centers can be built to have more diesel generators. We see this last session, which just ended. Yeah. We see he made it easier to build natural gas plants that passed, but he also put forward some renewable energy. And then we have local things too. Like Montgomery County banned plastic bags. Yay. And we have budget. You can actually give testimony on what Montgomery County spends its money on. Next slide. And what can you do at home? This is my neighborhood. Next. Montgomery County has a compost bin pickup program, and it has training workshops to how to compost. They have energy incentives to switch to clean energy at home. Rainscapes is a rebate program to install stormwater gardens or conservation landscapes in your own yard. And we can take public transportation, so we're driving less. All right. And you can also volunteer or donate to organizations that are doing the work that have all got hit hard by these federal grant freezes and are all working to stay alive. Or find an avenue to volunteer with them to know how to be a part. And with that, questions?
Okay, I am going to pass the mic around here.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some practical things we can do at home. And the things I'm thinking of specifically are things like community solar,
Mm-hmm.
which if you're not able to put or, you know, there are a lot of reasons why you can't tear up your roof and put up a solar collector. So that's one thing. And then what are the other kinds of practical things? Renewable energy, when you are looking for new electric sources. I've noticed that if you go on the county site that used to compare looking for renewable, you cannot find them anymore. Evidently, there are new laws that prevent certain people, certain suppliers from retailing comparable energy sources. So we're able to keep it because I had one before, and so we're grandfathered. But if you're looking for a new renewable source of energy supply, what do you do?
Yes, that is a great question. And I don't know if we want to go back to my previous one more. So I think it is a lot more difficult now with all the executive orders to know if we'll get the same tax write-offs. But it's still possible to switch to solar. Solar is a really big project, and I think there are some smaller things that you can also do at home. You know, Montgomery County's composting program. It's one of the only places in the area where they will pick up compost from your doorstep. In addition to, if you wanted to drop it off at a farmer's market or something like that, they will pick it up from your doorstep. And they offer workshops to teach you how to compost, which is a learning curve, I could tell you. So I highly suggest you take it. And that's one thing you can do to reduce waste in landfills, which then create methane gases and can add to climate change. Take public transportation. If it's halfway decent weather, this is kind of walking distance from the Bethesda Metro, or biking distance. Might be harder if you have kids, but you know, my parents used to take me on really long hikes, so I'm probably not a good judge of walking time. But that will reduce if you don't have an electric car, that will reduce emissions as well. And then grass in your yard does nothing to absorb flooding. Water pretty much runs off it because grass has a very shallow root system. But if you plant native plants through rainscapes, which you can get a rebate for, it creates a home for the beautiful butterfly that we started this presentation with. It absorbs greenhouse gas emissions, and it will help to absorb water as we get worse downpours. If we all put rainscape or conservation landscaping or a stormwater garden in our yards instead of a bunch of grass, and HOAs cannot stop you. It is a law in Maryland. Those are all things that we can do to help. Yes.
Oh, and if I
think
could
she
just
was next.
add on to your rainscapes, we do have plants in the back to take and start your rain garden if you don't have one. Who was next?
I believe the lady.
I think you touched on this, but if you are considering a new vehicle or a different vehicle, would you recommend electric?
It's better than gas. And we don't have a lot of time for me to get into what can still be long-term detrimentals in the supply of lithium batteries that also run electric cars. But it is better than gas.
Yep, Lydia.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, what Nature Forward is doing or has done on removing invasives? I mean, not all green are equal. When we drive on the highway, walk in the parks, you see so many invasive trees, like yeah, and vines. I mean, they are basically killing all those native plants. And this is a big issue. And Montgomery County only have a volunteer group with Warrior, and it's really pathetic. So what Nature Forward is doing on this?
Well, we certainly advocate at a county level for more and better invasive management. Invasives are an issue across the area, and they are only getting worse, and my heart hurts every time I see English ivy on trees. It's a tree of heaven and porcelain berry and all these different invasives. I think it's really important to educate each other and our neighbors on, planting, not planting invasives, especially if it's in our garden or in the area. But I think it's also very important, things like transmission lines, which are the big electric transmission lines. Every time we have development and trees get cut down or taken from the forest, that creates a whole pathway where invasives that grow so easily are able to come up and invade a forest. So I think it is better programs than Weed Warriors, but it's also looking at advocating towards sustainable development in Montgomery County so that we're protecting our forests and our natural areas to prevent invasives from even starting. So yeah, we are advocating on both those levels.
Yep.
Nice to meet another Lydia, by the way. Fortunately, the world has not exploded by both of us being in the same room.
Just, sorry, just a small comment. Since there were people who were asking about what to do at home. I think one thing you didn't mention was not something we can do, but something we can just not do, which is spray for mosquitoes and pests. I mean, and be okay with having, my lawn is full of native plants that look like weeds, but it can, if people are okay with something that looks a little bit less pristine, we can also do something by doing less.
Yes, I think we have done a disservice to ourselves by imagining that everything needs to look perfectly uniform. It's also driving climate change, and by having a diversity of plants, trees, it helps to reduce climate change. It absorbs stormwater, and not spraying. When we spray mosquito spray, it kills all our other beautiful pollinators, like our butterflies and our bees. It affects them as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Who else?
Well, I think the best thing to do is make sure you don't have standing water. Yeah, in your yard. There are many places it can collect.
Can you do a 15-second recap of that?
I'm afraid I'm afraid I can't give the exact instructions, but I could email it to somebody. But you can make homemade mosquito traps that you can hang in your garden where there's mosquito dung, but this that will allow the mosquitoes to go in and put the eggs will be, it's essentially standing water where the larvae will be trapped when they.
I hope you're on the church's eco action team so that you can instruct everyone.
We'll recruit her. And there's also a new company called Bee Friendly that doesn't use sprays. I think they're based in Kensington. So I think if there's no more questions, we will wrap up and just give a huge thanks to Lydia. That was amazing. Yeah. I really enjoyed how you wove together the biblical passages and themes of creation care with really hard data that will inspire us to make changes in our own lives and in our communities. So you'll be here for the next few minutes if people have more questions. Yeah. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And, oh, wait.
Happy Palm Sunday.
Oh, and please Lydia is coordinating our plant giveaway. So please take some things home and try them. And get involved with Nature Forward.